Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Balancing Relationship Wellness and Dental School, presented by the American Student Dental Association. We'll get started momentarily after some instructions and introductions. My name is Kasia Halko, and I'm the facilitator of tonight's program. I'm ASDA's marketing manager and one of 13 full-time staff that work for ASDA. Tonight's presenter is Dr. Michelle Montero. This webinar is a presentation of ASDA's Wellness Initiative, which began in 2014 following the tragic death of ASDA past president Juan Lee. The goal of the initiative is to equip ASDA members with a variety of resources related to overall wellness, including 5 dimensions in particular: emotional, physical, environmental, occupational, and intellectual. You'll find resources for each of these, as well as the links to the wellness centers at all the dental schools on ASDA's website. This September, ASDA is also celebrating Wellness Month, where members and chapters put a special focus on dental student wellness. Following tonight's program, ASDA will offer one more wellness webinar next Wednesday. Information about that is also available on our website. At this time, we'd like to recognize the exclusive sponsor of ASDA's Wellness Initiative. Great West Financial, on behalf of the ADA student members insurance plans, is committed to helping you stay healthy so you can achieve your career and life goals. At the same time, they want to give you the peace of mind of knowing that if anything ever did happen, injury, illness, or worse, you and your family can have some financial protection. That's why they offer ADA-sponsored disability and life insurance at no cost to ADA student members while you're in dental school. You can request the insurance at bringhealthyon.com. At this site, you'll also find lots of healthy tips and a sign-up page to receive health-related emails. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's presenter. Dr. Michelle Montero is a licensed clinical psychologist and sport and performance psychology consultant. She's the founder of Alchemy Performance Consulting, LLC. Dr. Montero provides individual, couples, family, and group therapy dealing with a variety of challenges. She has experience in a variety of settings, ranging from outpatient therapy to inpatient and residential treatment facilities. She works primarily with emerging adults and adults dealing with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, women's wellness, relationships, sexuality, and identity issues. Additionally, Dr. Montero specializes in sport and performance psychology, including sport and exercise, performing arts, and high-risk and high-pressure careers. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Michelle Montero.
Hello. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. And as Kasia said, I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm really excited to be here tonight and just want to thank you guys all from the very beginning for joining the webinar with me tonight. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The topic that we are discussing tonight is maintaining relationship wellness while in dental school. So the first thing I want to talk about is how do relationships benefit us? And the first thing that I want to say is that while there are lots of different types of relationships, be that familial, friendship, co-workers, mentors, things of that nature, the primary relationship that I'm going to be focusing on tonight is romantic relationships, whether that be long-term or partnered, married, things of that nature. So how do relationships benefit us, especially while we are in grad school? Relationships do a lot of different things for us to help us reduce stress. They are a huge buffer to our stress. So coming home from a long day of class or practicums or clinicals, coming home to having somebody sit there and you can talk with them, really decompress, talk about your day, that can be really, really, really helpful. It can buffer us from some of those things and the challenges that we are facing in the days while we are at work or school. Relationships, they also give us a sense of purpose. For many, many, many people, relationships, if you ask them, you know, if, like for example, you talk to individuals that have gone through, unfortunately, the hurricanes down in Texas or Florida, and you ask them, you know, what's the most important thing to you after going through this? The first thing that they say is, thank God my family or my loved one is okay. They give us a purpose. They make us feel good about ourselves, feel loved, remind us that we are good, that we have a purpose in our lives, not just to give to others, but that we're needed as well. Relationships, another way that relationships are incredibly important to us is that it is another way of learning. All of you here tonight, you are lifelong learners. You have gone through school probably most of your lives. Maybe some of you have even gone on to get a different degree. Maybe you're a returning student. And so you're lifelong learners. You learn in lots of different ways, and you all know that through clinicals and classes, you become more self-aware of yourself as a person and as a professional. But the first and most important ways that we learn about ourselves are through those relationships. The familial relationships that I talked about previously, but specifically our long-term committed relationships with our significant others or spouses. We learn about the parts of ourselves that maybe aren't so positive, the things that are really great and maybe not everyone gets to see. And we can really learn how to shine. We can learn to see ourselves through the lens that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise if we didn't have that person sitting there and letting us know what they think of us, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of the in-between. Another aspect of relationships that helps benefit us is that relationships, and studies, research shows that being in a long-term committed relationship actually has a positive impact on physical health. So if you look at long-term studies, individuals that have been in long-term committed relationships actually have fewer health concerns than those that maybe have been single or have had off and on relationships. So there really is something going on here physically for us that benefits us in a relationship, and again goes back to that buffer of stress. Relationships help promote emotional wellness, and then going back to that self-awareness piece and just overall health. Relationships can really increase our self-esteem, self-confidence. For many of us, we may be challenged to show ourselves a little bit more compassion or compassion towards others, again, because we're learning a little bit about ourselves through the lens of our loved one. So relationships in graduate school or professional school. It's my understanding many of you are early on in your program, and this can be a real adjustment, not just you know, going from maybe undergrad to grad school, or maybe you took a gap year or were doing other things, but it really is a big transition in lots of aspects of your life, but also with your relationships. It can really be challenging, and I know previously what I was saying was that relationships can really be a buffer for stress. They can be really positively influential in our physical and mental health, but they can also be a real demand on our time as well. And when you start out in a new program, especially if maybe you haven't been in school for a while, or maybe this is the first time you've been in grad school, you're not exactly sure what to expect, it can really be tricky. How do I balance this? You know, school, and while I was going through graduate school, I used to always say graduate school or my professional school was really like my first marriage. School really has a lot of demands on you. You have to go to class, you have to do your homework. Unlike when you have maybe a 9-to-5 job and you go to work and then you come home and you can kind of leave that at the office if you wish. When you're in school, that sort of transcends all boundaries and all aspects of your life. You might be studying while you're on vacation. You might be studying in your apartment. You go to class, you go to clinicals or practicums, but then you have to come home and study and prepare for those things as well. And especially if your significant other is not in school but may have a full-time job or is doing other things with their lives, that can be really difficult to kind of coordinate. Suddenly somebody has their as in you, the student, their life might not be as neat as it once was, and theirs is. Maybe they go to a 9-to-5 job or a more traditional type of work week type of setting, and suddenly they come home and you're having to study. All of a sudden your attention isn't on them and you're having to study or be with the books. That can be really challenging. It can create arguments, maybe you really want to be with them, but you know that you have to study. So how do you find that balance? Additionally, though, or in opposite of what I was just saying, relationships can be a huge support. So if you are maybe having a hard time, or you're studying for, I'm not sure what they're called in dental school. I know in med school they're the STEP exams. So as you're advancing through the program, they can be a huge support for you. They know, and maybe they can ward off other family members or friends when they're asking you for your time, or to come to a barbecue or a holiday event and you really can't. Your spouse, your significant other might be able to be a real support and sort of say, you know what, we really can't this year because this, you know, my significant other has to study, or we're really reducing the amount of things that we're doing outside of the home because we're really trying to take care of ourselves as a couple. So they can be a support, or sometimes a buffer to some of those outside relationships, but it can also be really demanding as well. I like to call that the tension of opposites. So here you have this person that you're very devoted to, or you care very much about, and they can be a huge sense of support for you, but also a real demand or a stress. So how do you balance that? How do you know when the relationship or school is really starting to threaten the wellness of your relationship versus support that? So in your relationship, I think, especially moving through a program such as yours, establishing and reestablishing healthy relationships is key. So what exactly does that mean? I really feel that a healthy relationship and establishing that is having very open dialogues with one another, letting each other know what it is that you want out of the relationship, what do you need for yourself. But even before that begins, I think that really takes a lot of maturity and self-reflection to really think about what it is that you want. You can't really expect your partner to meet your needs if you don't know what you want. So both of you sort of sitting back, reflecting on those kinds of things, and then coming together to let one another know, this is what I really need right now, this is what I want, this is what I hope for, these are the things that I'm kind of fearful about. Now, how do we sort of make those things work together? How are those similar? How are they different? That's super important. And you might hear me say a couple of times or repeat certain things, and that's intentional. A lot of these things, they might feel basic, but again, basic in our day-to-day lives sometimes can be the most complicated and might seem really basic, but then when you try to do it in reality, it has a lot of challenges. So I will be repeating quite a few things, mainly revolving around communication and being aware of yourself and your partner. Another important thing I think to think about is that for both you and your significant other, no one person is going to be able to fulfill all needs. I think often we know that, but then when we're very comfortable with another person, suspiciously, especially with our partner, sometimes we forget that and we place a lot of expectations on them that we might not even really realize that we're doing. As an individual that is going through school, part of your job is to be selfish. I don't really mean that in a negative way, but this is an investment in your life, in your career, and so you should be taking that very serious. But sometimes that can feel sort of threatening or insulting to your significant other, and they really might need a lot from you. Vice versa, you might really need a lot from them. You're going through a lot of stress, you're feeling very, likely feeling very, let's see, under the microscope, or that you're being evaluated on all different levels. And that can be really challenging and demanding, both mentally and emotionally. So we might look to our significant other to kind of fulfill all the needs that we need. And that's just not possible. So really finding for both of you, who are those go-to people outside of my relationship that I can actually talk to, kind of fall apart if I need to vent, maybe even vent about my partner, and really be able to kind of leave that there and come back so that you can nurture the relationship in different ways. It's really important to negotiate and compromise, and I think by that I mean really just about anything, you know. So let's say you guys are preparing for midterms or finals, or what might be the equivalent of the med school's exams, those STEP exams. maybe that's a time at the beginning of a semester that you sit down with your partner and you say, you know, there's a natural ebb and flow to the academic year. I can predict around the times that I'm likely to be a little bit more stressed out. And during that time, I'm not sure that I'm really going to be able to do a lot of the maintenance things around the house. I might not be able to do a lot of late nights with you, or I might really be, as I would call, the vault in the library or studying wherever it was that I needed to study by myself, where I didn't feel like I was getting interrupted by others. You might have to compromise on that and negotiate and let them know this is a time where I might need you to kind of carry us for a little while. And then in response, you know, you're able to kind of take that care of them and sort of, like I said, I guess just like really carry the couple for a while in other areas. Maybe your partner is the one that does the cooking or does the dishes. So what is it that you can do in return? So really finding ways to negotiate and compromise, and that's really what relationships are. Is negotiations and compromises, making sacrifices for one another and compromises, but really having, I think, a real healthy relationship that starts out from the very beginning. So you're not going to be able to predict every stressor that comes up, but there are certain things, especially in an academic year, that you can kind of look at and say, I know that this is going to be a stressful time, so how can I sit down and really talk with my partner about how we might get through this together and individually. Really being flexible with one another, I think that goes hand in hand with negotiating and compromising. If we can't be flexible with ourselves or with our partners, it's really going to be difficult. The more rigid you are about things, or the more rigid you are in your relationship or about a schedule, especially when you are already in a pretty rigorous program, the more demands and strains you're placing not only on you, but also on the relationship. So finding small ways to be flexible. Maybe, you know, I don't know, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but maybe you all can think of some questions to ask about that towards the end. The other thing to really think about is accepting those differences in your partner and yourself. I like to talk a lot about the fantasy and the reality. I think most people are very similar in the sense that we like to think about how, well, often we're thinking about negative things, but the way we want to be seen in a positive way, or that we are the partner that does, you know, everything right. And who could possibly be annoyed with us? That's the fantasy, that things are going to go really well, that your program is going to go really well, and there aren't going to be any blips in your relationship. So really kind of looking at what is fantasy, what is going on in my mind that I want to have happen in my relationship, and what is really going to happen or really is happening. And again, having those dialogues with one another. To that end, your fantasy or reality might look a little bit different than your partner's. It is super critical to be able to be flexible and to sit and listen and see that there are two sides to each story, two sides to everybody's view of the relationship, and neither one is actually reality. I'm sure you've all heard that saying, and I'm probably going to botch it here. That's something that I tend to do. But it's kind of like there's this one person's story, there's this person's story, and then there's the truth, the objective kind of reality. And I think it's really, really important to sit back, maybe not in a moment of anger or frustration or anxiety, but when you have a little bit of time to sit back and reflect on things, that your partner has a side too. And really, at the end of the day, no one is trying to hurt the other. We'll talk about that in the end, in case there are situations in a relationship where people are trying to hurt one another. But for the most part, I think people are really trying to be heard, try to feel loved, that they belong, that they are equals. And that's often where some disagreements or tension in a relationship might come up, especially when there are stressors such as grad school, and maybe not really allowing for the amount of time to kind of nurture the relationship that you maybe once did, or have the conversations that you used to have with one another. So elements of a healthy relationship. Really, I think the key to healthy relationships is really not super obvious, or not super obvious, not rocket science, but they're obvious things that often we take for granted and get complacent with and sort of, I don't know, kind of lose sight of. But honesty, being realistic with one another, and having some fairness with one another and with yourself. So again, this is where you might hear me repeating myself. I think it's super important in a healthy relationship to be aware of what it is that you want in your life, what it is that you need in your life, and what it is that you want and need and hope for in a relationship. That is super important to know for yourself so that you can communicate that with your partner. And if those things aren't in line with one another, you can talk about that too, and kind of decide mutually, what do we do here with this? How do we move forward now? Let one another know what those things are. You have to be realistic, realizing again that the other person isn't going to meet all of your needs or all of your demands, and really working to accept those differences between the both of you. How do you really want things to be, and how are they really going to be? You know, you may really want to be able to have super long, in-depth conversations about your day and your relationship and things that make you frustrated just in life in general. But when you're cramming for school and your partner is working or maybe also in school, that's going to be really complicated. So you might have to find a way to sort of carve that out into your day or into your week so that you make that time for one another. And really become aware, again, that the way that your life looks right now might not be the same as your partner's, and that's going to take some adjustment. Having some fairness. Your wants and your needs are just as valid as your partner's, and you have to work to compromise together. So again, there's that repetition. I think that's one of the things when we're stressed or feeling unnoticed or forgotten, unloved, we can often feel like things aren't fair. Often we aren't thinking about that other person's perspective, and that's okay. We have in the moment, but we have to be able to find a way to sort of get outside of that self-absorbed state that we might be in when we're kind of pouting. Again, we all do it. I certainly do. And that's okay. I want to normalize that. But then we also have to find a way to then reach back out to our partner and say, you know what, I didn't feel like that was fair, and I still don't feel like maybe X, Y, and Z is fair, but I also see your side as well. So validating that you both have feelings and you both have two sides to the story. So other elements of a healthy relationship is mutual respect and, again, good communication. I think you're probably noticing a trend. The thing I will repeat the most is communication, communication, communication. I know you all know that. I know that. Everyone knows that, but that is the number one thing that kind of breaks down when people are under stress. Mutual respect, I feel like that is something that can also break down, and not necessarily intentionally, but when we're stressed, we tend to turn inward and focus on ourselves and aren't always super self-aware of the way that we may be acting towards our partner, or what their needs are, or how we may be putting our needs ahead of theirs. So I guess with that, it's really important to not demand that the other person change just to meet our own expectations, but there's that give and take. We have to find those ways to appreciate them for who they are. So for example, some people might have heard of the 5 different love languages. Some individuals find that really helpful to talk about. I think this is a perfect example. Learning about your love languages, or the way that you show affection, or say I love you, whether that be through actions or touch, actually saying that. Not everybody is the same, and so there is a mutual respect that is built when you can really recognize how the other person shows those things, but also how they receive them, and then that you can kind of demonstrate those things for them and then also get that in return. So for example, I'm working with a couple right now, and excuse me, the one person never grew up saying I love you. It feels very foreign. This person feels a lot of love for their partner and has said it, but it isn't something that they say on a daily basis. On the flip side, the other person in the relationship, that is something that they say all the time. And so one of the conflicts that they have is that the one person is feeling sort of like suffocated by somebody saying, I love you all the time, and the other one is feeling not so noticed because the other individual doesn't say it enough. And so they're really working on those different ways and recognizing that they both show love in different ways, but they both need love shown in different ways. So they're finding those small ways to appreciate one another. So that might be, for example, the one individual told me that they are always the one to make dinner, and then they put leftovers in a bag for lunch the next day. So one, making the lunch, packing the lunch, making dinner, and all of those things is one way to show that person that they're thinking about them, that they appreciate them. And then that individual started putting little notes in there. It wasn't something that came necessarily naturally to them, but it felt a little bit easier to say I love you in a note than it did to be saying I love you, face to face every single day. And that other person, we've talked about that. So the other person recognizes, okay, they're making my lunch and they're putting this extra effort to let me know that they love me, and they're writing that in a note. That was effort and validation and support of the other that went a really long way. So finding those small ways to show the individual that you care and that you see them. Again, trying to see from the other person's point of view. You don't have to agree with one another, but you definitely do need to respect one another. And then when differences do come up, really trying to work through them. And I think the most important thing is to not forget to laugh. Often, life can get so serious. School is a huge stress, a lot of demands. The political culture that is going on right now is really stressful on a lot of folks, and within households or in relationships. So really going back to those basics. What made you guys get together in the first place? What makes you laugh? And really finding some ways to set aside and nurture that. Make sure that you're laughing with one another. If you can't laugh together, then there's going to be a long road ahead. So maintenance and mitigation. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. Self-awareness, communication, making sure that you're open, honest, you're having planned conversations. And I don't mean like you're setting up a business meeting with one another, but sometimes when you have really busy schedules, you do have to plan a date night, or you do have to plan times to have pretty important phone calls or in-person conversations about things. So really sitting down together and finding out a plan that's going to work for you all. Setting boundaries, I think are super important. Assessing and negotiating different aspects of your relationship. Providing attention and affection and support for one another, always going back to that. Sharing and listening to one another's fears and insecurities. Again, I think oftentimes when couples start to fight or things start to really break down, that could be happening for a lot of different reasons. But often individuals are starting to feel personally overwhelmed, stressed. Maybe they're feeling neglected, whatever that may be. Maybe they're really afraid about not getting a promotion at work, or you're worried about exams, or being evaluated, or not as good as your peers, maybe that imposter syndrome. So really talking to one another and recognizing that you're people and you're leaning on one another, you're sharing a life. And when you do that, you can become a little bit closer to one another, and suddenly your stress starts to go down because you have that partner in crime again. The other thing, and you all know this, but quality time. Quality time is so important. You might not be able to spend, every weekend frolicking in the park or doing whatever it is that you guys might have used to do, but you can find ways to have quality time. Maybe that means making dinner together one night, or going for a walk, or you pick that person up from work that day and you go to the grocery store, you're running the errands, but you're laughing while you do it, and really being in the present moment. Quality is definitely more important than quantity. Although quantity can be very nice as well. So elements of communication. Communication, again, I think that is the core to a really healthy relationship. So there's verbal communication and there is nonverbal communication. In my practice, I work with individuals every day on communication, and I think one of the things that is often lost in individuals and then with couples is that not only is just communication important, but there is so much that is lost through nonverbal communication. Your facial expressions, your eye contact, vocal cues. I'm sure that if you all were sitting here listening to me in person, you would probably have a very different experience of this presentation than you do right now. And that's because you can't see my eye contact. You don't know what my body language looks like. You don't know how I'm moving around physically. All of those things express things. They can express boredom. They can show if the individual can read if you're annoyed or not. And I think one of the things in today's modern society is that we lose a lot of that while we have technology that is amazing and that is allowing me to do this webinar right now. It also really puts a barrier between you and loved ones and other people in communication. So you're losing those things. One of the #1 things that I say to people, and I know that they're going to continue to do it anyway, is fighting over text messages, over email, Snapchat, whatever it may be. Those are all really great avenues to communicate and kind of have playful conversations with one another, but you lose a lot of communication in the nonverbal communication. You don't know what people mean. Or, so for example, I had a client the other day who had a huge argument with her significant other because the individual didn't, they hadn't returned a text all day, multiple texts all day, but that person was in school, they were in practicums, they were in class, and they didn't have their phone, they had it turned off, and the individual felt like they were purposely ignoring them. And while that may be true at times, it also is very likely that that person is just busy. And so getting very worked up over that. Once upon a time, we did not have text messages or even cell phones, and you had to wait till you got home to talk to your loved one. Now, there are pros and cons to both of those things, but I think when individuals, there are tensions that are running high, modern technology can really complicate that some. So if there are things that you are upset about, find a way to kind of set up like a red flag. It's like, hey babe, I need to talk to you right now. Text message is off limit, and do it face to face. It might feel a little bit more awkward. You might feel a bit more vulnerable, and that is a good thing. Showing vulnerability to your partner is a good thing. It can really bring down the tensions. It can help them feel validated as well, that they feel vulnerable. It might help them feel that you're more sincere than they initially thought over a text or an email. And remembering that verbal communication is also influenced by our families, our cultural backgrounds and values, and really understanding the way that somebody does communicate is super important. Maybe your partner is somebody that likes to sit back and process things for a little bit before they have a serious conversation. And maybe you're somebody that likes to just kind of confront. You have to sort of learn and become aware of the dance that you both have and how you're dancing together. So those are really important things. When you are together, those nonverbal cues can be super important. So paying attention to those, I think, is really valuable. So communication dues. I think this isn't going to be mind-blowing by any means, but sometimes very difficult to actually put into practice or execute. So especially when you're emotional. But communication dues, it is definitely the most important, is to listen to understand, not to form your argument. I know that I can be guilty of this, as most people probably can. Oftentimes we're listening to individuals and we're listening to them. We actually hear them talking, but we're not really listening to them. We're actually waiting for them to stop talking so that we can make our point or form our argument. And if you really want to have an open dialogue or a healthy relationship, sitting back, recognizing that less is more, and listening to understand, not to sort of go out into a fight. Staying on one topic at a time. When tensions are high, people like to jump from one thing to another. They like to point fingers. They like to bring up things from the past. So really staying on one topic at a time. If you're talking about, like maybe you're having a conversation about how to plan quality time together, let's stick to that. Let's not go into, well, you stay late at the office on this day or you do this. You know, really sitting down and saying, when can we find the time to do this? How can we agree on a set time that we can do weekly or maybe bi-weekly or whatever that may be? So staying on topic. Again, letting go of those judgments and the comments that you might have and you really want to get to, so you can really hear what their message is. Again, I think it's super important to remember that when we're upset, we often are thinking about ourselves, but often the other person is not trying to hurt you. They're really just trying to be heard and feel validated, and you're probably feeling that way too. That's something that you might even be able to reconnect on. You both have the right to your own feelings. I talk about this all the time. So each partner has absolutely every right to feel the way that they do. That does not mean that it is permission to act like a jerk or to like name call or that your feelings are facts. You can feel a certain way, but that doesn't mean that the things that are actually happening are facts. So talking about your feelings and working through those things, being respectful, again, looking for ways to compromise. And the number one thing that I will say is to always, always, always clarify, ask questions. Going back to that couple I was telling you about where they didn't respond to the text message. So what ended up happening is the individual said, just assumed, and again, they felt upset. They were upset and they felt or thought or created in their mind that their partner had basically just ignored them all day. That is not the fact. You can feel ignored, but that was not fact. They were actually really very busy with clients doing their thing. So a good clarifying question would be, you know, what was going on today at work that you weren't able to get back to your phone? Did you lose your phone? Did you leave it at home? Really kind of trying to figure out what was going on with that person so that they can actually give you an idea into their world rather than sort of getting in trouble or being punished for something that may or may not have actually even happened. So don't blame the other person for all of the problems between you. That can be a very, very easy thing to do. Don't bring up past issues. There may be past issues that are still not totally resolved. However, when you are talking about certain things, that is not the time. So really talking and staying in the present about what is going on at the time, sticking with one topic and resolving that. Don't read or jump to conclusions, read people's minds. Again, jumping to conclusions, you obviously were ignoring me all day. That doesn't feel good on the receiving end, to feel that your significant other really believes that you were intentionally ignoring them when really you were just doing what you're supposed to be doing, and vice versa. Those always never statements, making those generalizations, that can get you in big trouble. It's so easy to do. You know, I would be lying if I said that I don't get caught up in that as well, but really trying to find a way to minimize those things, because it really doesn't do anything productive for you. Don't name call or interrupt the other person or belittle them throughout the conversation. It can be very, very tempting to do that, but in the long run, it's not really going to do anything or make a good investment in your relationship. So setting healthy boundaries, beware of your emotions. If you're feeling that you're frustrated or tired and all of those things, that is totally allowed. You're allowed to set a boundary with individuals. You can, you know, talk to your significant other and say, you know, I'm feeling really tired. I really need to take some space right now. That's okay. Take some time to check in with yourself, and do whatever it is that you need to do to recalibrate. When you are setting those boundaries, make sure you're doing it clearly and using as few as words as possible. And I guess what I mean by that is, so often people feel like they are being clear, or they feel like they've told their significant other what they mean or what they need, but they've done it in a very roundabout way, and they're kind of expecting their significant other to read their mind or know exactly what they meant, and that's confusing. So really being clear, you know, I cannot binge watch Netflix with you tonight. I have to study for this exam. I'm not going to, so don't even ask. You know, boom. You don't have to do it in a nasty way, but set those boundaries so people know. And again, if you're looking at your semester, you can predict those times that are going to be a little bit more stressful than others. Then you can remind your significant other, don't forget, midterms are coming up. The next 2 weeks, I'm not going to be as, you know, around or as fun, maybe. And I really do need to be in the vault. So please don't disrespect that. Also remembering that no is a complete sentence. I think often when we're trying to set boundaries, and grad students, I think, can feel this a lot. You're feeling very torn or pulled between school and, you know, your home life or other relationships, and really having the need to maybe justify why you can or cannot do something. You don't have to do that. Saying no is enough. And if that's not enough for the other person, then that's their issue to kind of work through. Your boundaries are going to be tested. You're going to have to repeat no sometimes, maybe even multiple times. And really don't expect your significant other to like the changes or the limits that you're placing on them, especially if this is very new in your relationship. People are used to what they know, and when those things change, that can be very difficult to change with them. It will take time, and the more persistent and consistent you are with that, the quicker that will happen. All right, so moving on. Common relationship problems, the emotional support versus the emotional demand, spending time together versus time apart, the changing aspects and expectations of a relationship. That's going to ebb and flow with or without being a professional school. Dealing with other friends and families, or potentially in-laws, or if you're not married, just the other person's family in general. And then handling money. I think that's one of the big issues that I deal with my clients a lot that are in grad school and are in relationships, especially if the other person is not in school. So the one person that's in school might be feeling really bad or ashamed for spending money, and the other person is supporting them. Or maybe the other individual is feeling kind of resentful that they're always paying for everything. And then also the idea of student loans. We all know that those are a very real concern, and can be really, really, really difficult to talk to your partner about. So those are some common relationship problems. A question that I get asked all the time is, so how do I know that this relationship is working or isn't, and when is it time to say goodbye? The things that I always say is, you know, it's time to say goodbye to a relationship, obviously, when your physical safety is being threatened. I say obviously, and I really probably shouldn't say that, because if it's not happening to you, it feels very obvious. But sometimes when you're in a relationship like that, it can be very difficult to see what's happening, and it can be very challenging to get out of it. But if you are feeling physically threatened, then definitely finding a way to kind of get out of that relationship. If you're afraid, physically, emotionally, whatever that may be, if it's not feeling good to you, you're being beaten down either intellectually or emotionally. We don't have the time to really get into this right now, but I know that there's in I guess pop culture and just in the news and things of that nature, there's been a lot more attention to a term that in my field that we call gaslighting. And so that might be those subtle manipulations, and emotional or intellectual put downs and things of that nature. So if you're feeling that often, that's another good sign that it might be time to reevaluate. Your sense of self has been diminished in the relationship. My guess is your sense of self might be diminished to some extent while you're in school, because you don't have a lot of time to do other things. But if all you have is your relationship in school, and you don't feel like there's time or room for anything else, again, it might be time to think about that. If the person that you are in a relationship with is unable to take responsibility for his or her actions, or is unable to take care of themselves. So some people might have some of their own mental health issues or other things going on, and when that starts to become like a chore, or you feel personally responsible for somebody, that takes a toll on an individual and on a couple, and it's okay to say goodbye. If there's substance abuse or any other types of things that are preventing somebody from, again, thinking rationally or taking care of themselves, it might be time to reevaluate. And then simply, you just don't want to be in the relationship anymore. You're always allowed to say goodbye or walk away. So here are some signs of abusive relationships. I'm not going to read through all of those. Obviously, you can see the screen as well. But signs of an abusive relationship: if it really just doesn't feel good, if you're feeling afraid, if you feel like you're being easily insulted, there's that gaslighting. If you don't know what that is, please look that up. That's a very real thing. Often people will describe that as, man, I feel like I'm crazy, like in the relationship, or we're in arguments all the time and I don't understand where they're coming from, or I just can't do anything right. If there are some unwanted sexual experiences in the relationship, or you're feeling pushed to be physical when you're not really wanting to, if you know that there has been past abuse in other relationships, there's a high likelihood that that will be repeated in this individual's other relationships, or maybe you tend to be the one that does the abusing. That can happen as well. So these are all very, very real things that happen in relationships. I think for many people, we like to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe how anyone would ever stay in a relationship like that. But then it might start to happen, and it happens in very insidious, small, subtle ways. We might feel ashamed that this is happening to us, or that we are doing that to another, or it's mutually abusive, or we just never think that this could happen to us. And so it makes it very difficult to kind of reach out to others or talk about those things. And in the end, anytime I've worked with somebody, the thing is that they've said, I wish I would have gotten out sooner. So finding those small ways to sort of communicate with others, or find ways to sort of take hold of your life and find a way out of those relationships. No one deserves to be in a relationship of physical or emotional or mental abuse or sexual abuse. So really finding a way out. Here is the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and there's others in the area as well that you could Google. So those are some of the signs of abuse. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm not usually used to doing the presentation where I talk the entire time. I usually field questions throughout. So I would really like to turn this over now to you all, if there are any questions that you may have for me.
Thank you, Dr. Montero. That was a really great and comprehensive presentation. I would like to now invite our participants to submit their questions, and the way to do that is to type it into the chat box that you see on the screen there. You'll submit your question. I'll read it anonymously, so your name won't be attached to it. You can feel free to ask anything you'd like. If you prefer to email your question directly, you can do that and send a note to Dr. Montero at the email address that's on the screen. So I do have a couple questions. So I'd like to start with one on long-distance relationships. That's an added stress to a relationship. Is there any other advice that you would give when one of the partners is farther away and maybe they're only seeing each other once a month or once every 6 weeks? What can they do to keep the relationship going?
Yeah, that's tough. So long-distance relationships, I did not bring that up, and I'm so glad that you did. That is just, even if you weren't in grad school, that is just a stress in and of itself. So the things that I like to say to individuals is that is even more important than to find time to set aside or carve out. And I recognize it might be really challenging to do it on a consistent basis, but if you can, maybe even finding, maybe say, every Wednesday night is a Skype night, and we're not going to do anything but just like talk and maybe play a game over FaceTime or Skype. I've had couples say that they read books together, they've watched movies together. So finding something that really works for the two of you, but really carving that out so that you can nurture that part of yourselves. And then I think, again, it can be really difficult to get to see the other person, and finances might be an issue there as well. But if you can, sort of finding a way to sort of alternate when the other, like 1 month this person's coming here, you're going there. And then really making sure that before you see one another, that you talk about those expectations. Like, I have a long weekend, I have a lot of studying that I have to do, so I want to make sure that I'm maximizing the amount of time that I have with you, but I also need to set aside some time to study as well. So talk about that before you get there, so that when you are there, you're both on the same page, you know what's going on, and you really are able to find that time to just kind of enjoy one another, have some downtime. So those, I know it might not be the quick fix or the magic pill that you're looking for, but I think it really does take that practice and intentionality and carving out that space for one another and making it a priority, especially because you have such limited time being so far apart.
Wonderful. Thank you for that response. Our next question asks, could you say more about the 5 love languages and what those are?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I actually don't remember all of them. So I am not an expert on the love language books, but you can certainly look them up. What I can say is that people show love in different ways. So you know, I'll share an example of myself. You know, I am somebody that I show love through actions and doing, and that's how I feel love as well. So in my relationships, both my familial, my significant other, and with my friends, the way that I show that I love individuals is by doing tasks for them. Maybe on the way home, I stop and I get their favorite ice cream, or, you know, give them a back massage or whatever it may be. Other individuals, they show love by touch. And, you know, what I don't want to say, and again, I'm no expert on the exact 5 love languages. I know it's a great book and can be really helpful. But what I do want to say is that you can be multiple. You can show and share and receive love in multiple ways, but often people kind of prefer or have some dominant ways over others. So some people might really love touch. They're touchy-feely all the time, or they really need you to say that you love them, or give them praise a lot. They need you to say that you're doing a really good job. So those are some of the ways that individuals show love, and I think it, you know, can be really, really great to read that book if that's something that you want to do, or about the love languages, and kind of identify a little bit more about the ways that you give and receive love. Often people aren't even super aware of how they do that, and then when they get more in touch with that, it makes more sense to them. I've had many clients say to me, oh my gosh, no wonder that last relationship didn't work out, because this was their love language and this was mine. So that's what I can say to that. Another really, really great book that I would recommend for all of you, both to read on your own, but then even as a couple. I've had lots of couples that have read them together. It's called Undefended Love, and it goes into details, and it will have you kind of reflect on ways that you grew up, and the ways that you do feel love, or recognizing ways that maybe when you're very frustrated with your partner, you didn't really realize why you were frustrated, but what might be behind that, and then how that can kind of complicate or challenge your romantic relationship. So that's called Undefended Love. It's a great book. I would recommend that as well.
Great, thank you. We have another question. One of our attendees asks, I'm very career-oriented and I have very specific goals for future schooling, but I also have plans for my relationship, and I'm concerned I won't be able to satisfy both. How do I choose without compromising my personal and professional goals?
That's a tough one. I think you're in good company. I think there are a lot of individuals that struggle with that as well. So, you know, in the beginning of my presentation, I talked a lot about really knowing what it is that you want. And it sounds like you're very driven and you have goals both for your relationship, but also for your career as well. So I think really sitting down it really starts with you, I believe, really knowing what it is that you want, what you are willing to sort of like compromise on, even in a little bit. So in in this particular domain, I mean, it comes up in lots of areas, but there can be that very black and white thinking. I can't give up anything in my career, you know, or I can't think of some examples right now, but to really like sit down and become more aware of what are the things within your career that you are able to sort of compromise and are absolute musts for you, and the same for your relationship. It might mean that if you are in a current relationship, if that significant other can't get behind that and you're also not willing to compromise, it might mean that this isn't the right relationship for you. But if you and your significant other both agree on those things and can find ways to really make those things happen, then that's great. But I think the communication piece and the self-awareness piece on both ends is super important. The other thing that I will say to that is often in relationships, maybe the other person, they know that about you, but they might be feeling like, oh gosh, like I'm kind of intimidated by this and I don't really know how to have that discussion with them. And I'm sort of just going along with it because I don't really know, I'm afraid of losing them, but I'm also afraid of broaching this subject. So becoming self-aware and knowing, you know, how are you as a communicator, how do you communicate what it is that you want, and how that might be being perceived by your partner can be really important and can kind of help let those the defenses down to have a more, I think, authentic, unguarded conversation about those things. But it definitely starts with the communication and the self-awareness.
Terrific. Thank you for that response. We're coming down to the end, and so the questioner says thank you as well. We are coming to the end, and so I have time for one more question if someone wants to submit one. If we don't get another question, we'll wrap up here, and I'll just give you some closing information before we say goodnight. So I just want to give another couple seconds here to see if any more questions come in. It looks like maybe not, and so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll wrap up. And first of all, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Montero, for taking the time and for being very forthcoming with really great questions and answers and your entire presentation. ASDA's next wellness webinar is going to take place on Monday, September 25th. The topic is Surviving Dental School, Overcoming Stress, Burnout, and Depression. I encourage everyone to register on your own or with your chapter. Once again, I'd also like to thank tonight's sponsor, ADA Student Members Insurance Plans, underwritten by Great West Financial. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for participating in the program tonight. Later on, you'll receive an email with a link to a short survey. Please take just 3 or 4 minutes to tell us what you thought about tonight's presentation and what other topics you'd like ASDA to present about. This program is being recorded, and it will be posted on ASDA's website and YouTube channel by the end of next week. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and good night.